Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. Today's guest is Eve Logan. Her website is evelogan.com. She has a master's in counseling, psychology. She also, excuse me, she also, she also has a bachelor's in biochemistry. She has written a couple of books, and she will show them later on. And we could say a lot more about her bio, but we will leave it at that. You can check that out on her website. So Eve, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's good to talk to you today, and hopefully we'll be able to speak freely.
Yeah.
Because you know how much censorship is going on pretty heavily nowadays. So
yeah, it's time to move to other platforms. They are there, and some things you can no longer upload to YouTube. It's as simple as that.
It was getting boring, as I say, and I usually end up going to some of the other platforms. Just if I wanted to get the real news, I end up going to my private sources now.
Yeah.
Except for the weather. I can get the weather. Yeah.
So, because we are in this really interesting situation, our shared predicament all over the world, I would like to start at that point. So, from a point of view of psychology, where is this urge to micromanage everything and anything and to control everybody? Where is that coming from? That does not sound healthy to me.
Well, on a macro scale, it's definitely evidence of psychopathology, from a psychological standpoint, because anyone who has excessive control, manipulation, power issues tends to fall on the spectrum of what we'd call the cluster B personality disorders, which are, psychopathic, narcissistic, borderline, or sociopathic. So that's what's really manifesting in a large scale with a lot of the high-level corruption that's really going full force in terms of almost seems like it's a showdown in the world, and especially in the US, like the elections, for example, although it's always been present in terms of the level of corruption and the personality types that have gotten in places of power and control. But a lot of people who, let's say, go after power and control tend to be like narcissistic, psychopathic, sociopathic types, or greedy, super greedy, power hungry types. And that, to a psychologist, it just tells you what's happening, right? Psychologically, there's something wrong with them.
Yeah, but I have to say there are also therapists who go along with the narrative, which I find really disturbing.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because this is not a matter of intelligence, because I know people who are very intelligent and educated, and it almost seems as if it's a spiritual discernment that needs to be at play here, and also what I call emotional intelligence and emotional literacy, because people who have the emotional intelligence tend to be able to spot, like a spade is a spade, so to speak, like they're able to spot them and like set the appropriate boundaries or make the appropriate actions to avoid problem people and groups. So, people who are energy sensitive tend to be able to tell, right, if something's not right, basically. But then I've seen people who have been completely hoodwinked, even people who claim to be spiritual, and then it really causes us to question reality, like those of us who thought we knew the truth, and then you come to find out like another level of corruption and another deeper layer, and where we didn't know it really existed before. So I think we're definitely waking up now in terms of what's coming to light, all these levels of corruption and deception. And really, I think this calls to question a lot of even what my books are about, that we need to be able to discern appropriately when we have danger in our midst of certain personality types or certain groups, certain relationships, and that be able to discern correctly so that we can make the wise choices to navigate around potential, like very lethal situations. in relationships too.
Mm. Do you have any clue why those types of people are predominantly to be found in politics, CEOs of mega corporations, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. Well, they're power and control freaks, and
Mm,
some of them don't have like a conscience, so
mm,
they more easily can take advantage of people, you know, theft, stealing, fraud, whatever, without a conscience. So
mm,
people who don't have a conscience tend to be what I call the narcissistic personality disorder, the sociopathic, psychopathic, and then also those that have taken blood oaths with what I call the Luciferian and satanic power Babylonian systems. And then there's, you know, this is something that I came to learn only over time by working with people who've had what I call anomalous trauma, like MK Ultra, for example, or satanic ritual abuse or alien abduction and all that. That there is a subpopulation that call themselves the hierarchy elite, who are these what they call the satanic serpent seed bloodlines that are in high positions of control, a lot of wealth, and basically in control of a lot of policies in different sectors of society internationally. And so when they take control with their agenda, then they have a certain characteristic, and it's all from there that a lot of the corruption actually is implemented.
mm,
So people like the programming. I mean, this is something that I've noticed. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but in the alien abduction, even in the alien contact scenarios, some of them would have been taken by a certain ET. And then there was sometimes layers of deception in their experiences where the ETs would be telling them, you know, oh, you know, the human race, you're a bunch of bad people creating wars, and almost do like a guilt trip to make them feel bad and guilty about it. But at the same times, they were the perpetrators who were trying to throw a guilt and shame trip on people when they were under like a luciferic energy signature. So they try to make like the small person feel guilty for like this horrible, let's say, war and killing in the world. But then when you look at who is implementing the power and control systems of war and all kinds of things like that, they're the satanic bloodlines who are manipulating different, you know, narratives, including religious narratives as well, or educational, political, entertainment, you know, the Vatican, whatever.
yeah.
So it's really amazing that you don't really know this until you work with people who've had, let's say, narcissistic abuse or ritual abuse traumas, and then you look at the family lines and the relationships and the patterns in which they abuse people and how they brainwash them and punish them so that they will carry out a certain agenda or mind control role. And then when you see how they operate, it's like, oh, now I see the light and how they're doing this. So, but most people don't know, who are in the lower levels of education or politics or even, you know, religion. They don't know how they're even being manipulated. So the whole thing, even with my book, which the first one was called The Love Bite, and that was
Mm,
about how love relationships were being set up and orchestrated, manipulated by these alleged ETs and aliens, by people who've had multiple encounters and abductions. And so we kind of figured out, wow, you know, they're doing this and this is the signature and this is how they're doing it and how they're like manipulating people. So once you find out how they're manipulating people on all these different levels, it's pretty easy to find out what that dynamic is in relationships, and then be able to correct it so that you don't have to fall under that influence, you know.
mm. So we have a growing awareness of so-called toxic relationships, be it that you are in a relationship with a borderliner, a narcissist, what have you.
Mhm.
So, and I always say, if you find yourself in front of a computer researching the behavior patterns of your partner, your mother, your father, your brother, your friend, whatever,
Yeah.
um, that is a good sign that there might be something seriously wrong. Otherwise, you would not do that. So how do you distinguish between toxic relationships of that sort or that have an alien or love bite or an anomalous aspect to it?
Um, well, in the beginning, you know, I'll just show you a picture of my first book called, here we go, cute little picture. It's called The Love Bite,
Mm-hmm.
Alien It's kind of shiny in human love relationships. So as I set out on my quest to actually learn about, I wanted to learn about ETs, aliens, and visitations and UFOs, and people who had, let's say, more than one encounter, visitation, or abduction, depending on their experience, and then get together in support groups and really learn as much as I could on my own, as opposed to what was in the official literature and what was okay to talk about publicly at the time, like
Mm.
in the 90s or what. And then had a support group and started talking with people who had the real encounters over time, multiple types, and then looking at their lives and the relationships and the kinds of things that were really happening, what I felt was behind the scenes that other, let's say, alien abduction researchers or ufologists weren't really talking about. And some of the therapists might have been discovering these things, but until we figured out that there was a level of deception and manipulation and mind control, many people would miss these things unless they went back and did, let's say, many hypnotic regressions or observe their patterns over time to uncover the deep trauma and to work on healing it. So basically, I just found out there was all this other manipulation going on other than, let's say, when people got abducted by aliens, you hear the classic encounters of, oh, well, they took them and they had missing time and then they end up having maybe implants or some kind of medical experimentation, or they got pregnant and they took the baby, whatever. But there was much more than just the medical or the classic kinds of things that were being reported. So what tends to happen in people when there's high strangeness, right? They think that, well, we need to keep this credible or people just won't believe us. And this happened in ufology. Like, so they'll only do the nuts and bolts and what we can find scientific evidence. But meanwhile, there's like all this other stuff that's overlooked because they consider it not scientific because there's no hard evidence of something. But they end up overlooking it and trying to put it in a square peg or a category that is only certain things, but then that basically takes away the ability to see it for what it is. And so there's many other things happening on a psychological level and a spiritual level, and what I think is interdimensional interference as well. So anyway, I found out all this stuff and then started talking with people, and then many of them were having what I called love obsessions that were as if they were engineered and orchestrated by the aliens that were handling them and taking them. So they would, let's say, get abducted on a craft or in an underground base or some kind of place in another environment, and then we'd be set together or given the image of a partner that they would meet, and they would have this instant like soul connection kind of experience. And this is all written about in the case histories in my book. So, and then they would maybe meet the person, and then they would have a sudden love obsession, like it's their soulmate. And then the relationship would play out in a certain pattern that would have an obsessive love component, and then kind of be like almost like the classic narcissistic love bombing, devaluation, discard, cutting them off
Mm.
kind of dynamic. Although in the alien abduction and even the dark side of Cupid, which is my second book, there was more evidence and reports of the supernatural and the paranormal aspects of seeing some kind of what I call a third party entity, like an alien or like a, a serpent figure, snake figure, a ghost, but it was more like some kind of other dimensional entity that was lurking around, being seen or experienced in some way that was interfering with the relationship or setting them up or feeding off what I call the emotional loosh energy of the
Mm.
whole relationship, including the sexual energy as well. So that was basically observed either when one or both people in the dyad of the relationship. And so that was pretty consistent of a finding that would maybe determine how that's different from, let's say, the classic narcissist, codependent, twin flame disaster, because you're with cluster B, and a cluster B causes great, great damage in a relationship. Okay. And a lot of times, if you've never had one, you don't know until after you come out from under it, and it leaves you completely confused and shattered. And it takes a while to heal from those kinds of things. So that's what I discovered, is that there's so much going on in the interdimensional and supernatural realm, as well as mind control by these beings, as well as some humans, right, who are in these secret projects that could be connected to what I call the satanic elite bloodlines.
Mm-hmm.
So really there is a connection between some of the, what I call the more malevolent alien factions that are, let's say, abducting people, and some military, secret government, whatever groups that are taking people and doing certain kinds of things, and then using them as operatives under mind control to do certain things, like some of the super soldier accounts. So that's where it just kind of got messy, and then there was so much more going on.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are not happy about, like in the beginning, the narrative for ETs was, there was like these benevolent space brothers from some of the early accounts in the 50s, for example, and even in the 60s. And then as time progressed, there was more accounts of something that was a little more sinister and more traumatic and involved medical evaluations and severe trauma and memory loss. So, we had to ask the question, what kind of beings are doing this? If they're showing us a screen memory, some of them, of something benevolent or missing time, and then if you go do really good hypnotherapeutic regressive techniques, you come to find that there's a screen, but underneath it is what really happened. And so this is what my mentor Barbara Bartholick had discovered in her research. And so I was basically corresponding with her for many years until she died, to learn more about what she was the first one who really came out with, like, what she called the drama of the love obsession, that the aliens were like putting people together and they would just go through this whole, emotional turmoil thing, and even if they were married to other partners, right? So it create a lot of chaos and a lot of, distress. So she helped me understand what was happening, so that when I had my group, and there was like 4 people in the group going through the same thing, including myself, we were able to find out what was happening and be able to better understand it. And I say that if I hadn't known, I may not have survived, because it's so traumatic that it could kill you. And I'm not saying this lightly. I'm saying this, that some people have died as a result of the trauma and the anguish and the emotional loosh harvesting, in terms of the vampirization that happens. And then if you talk, like, it depends on the kind of people that are taking you in the abduction programs, that even people in my book, in my first book, several of them have died as a result of either health problems or being targeted. So some of them were literally threatened not to talk about, don't discover what's going on behind all this. They wanted to keep a certain narrative, which was basically a mind controlled narrative of what was happening instead of what's really happening. So that's what led me to find out more.
Yeah. So this screen that you talked about, would that be like, let's say, a false or implanted memory?
Yes. In fact, I
Okay.
remember there was one woman that I interviewed at least 4 times who had gone through a recovery that was pretty amazing. And she was able to stop her abductions and go through a real transformative healing and integration and empowerment over time. And one of the things that she must have put it in one of the interviews, but one of the screen memories was when she was taken, and she had draconian, reptilian, many different kinds of aliens, as well as human medical people in these MyLab medical experimentation, because there's different things that they do. But I remember her telling me there was a screen memory that she was given of like some happy new agey dolphin kind of thing, like, oh, these benevolent dolphins, and then but underneath it was like the whole experience, which was different from the screen memory, obviously. And then there was others who had told me that they were actually used to abduct people, because they were in a project where they were actually helping to abduct people. And then the people who were being abducted were given a choice of what screen memories they could choose, including like a benevolent ET. And then, basically he told me this is what they did. So he was in a secret project as a military operative under mind control to do this to other people. So there's evidence right there. But I'm not saying every single one of them will have the screen memory, and not every single one of them will be one of these malevolent races. But you always have to look at the evidence of what kind of trauma somebody has in their life, and what kind of relationships they have, and if they have unresolved trauma evidence in their life. So, yeah.
Have you ever encountered anybody that had memories of let's say, abductions or my labs. Mm, and it turned out that that was an implanted memory.
Well, I've had, yeah, let's see, one who was in my lab, where they were using, it was pretty wild, but she was a my lab, and then they had this thing where they would, the military, whoever were taking her, like, it would be a group of people who were taken, but they were like drugged, and it was all these people like in her neighborhood somehow. They were part of some test thing, and most of them were not lucid. They were like in this trancey state where they thought they were dreaming, or maybe they weren't even lucid. That the military brought out these cardboard cutouts of entities that looked like reptilians to make the people think they were reptilians, because they were being so brainwashed, and they really weren't reptilians. They were just like a cardboard thing. And then there was another gal who was a MyLab who was in a group abduction where there was alleged alien grays, but it was really small humans dressed in suits, and that was another thing. And then there's some where there's reptilians pretending to be humans, like where there's human military. It's both. So it was several types of things. So I can't say it was one or the other, because there were several forms of deception that could be done. But there was another one where somebody dreamed or had like a screen memory of being in a group of people in like a classroom and being shown on a screen alien grays, and then to be afraid and like of that. But they were actually putting it on a screen and pulling forth that narrative to make them afraid. So there's all these different things going on, like these they would do stage managed dreams, and that was something that we would have a lot, we'd talk about in our groups, where you would have a certain kind of dream and you felt like, wait a minute, this is not mine, this is being like managed, like
Mm.
imagery. And then trying to see how our reactions would be, or what we would be easily manipulated to believe. So I think it's good to question everything and not necessarily believe blindly, even an experience, unless you know for sure. So that just means you have to do a lot of self-reflection and introspection honestly, instead of blindly believing what you want to believe or what you're afraid of.
So if you are in an alien love bite situation, is it that one individual is hosting an entity, and that entity sorry, and that entity is working through that person? Or is it both? Or how does that work?
Sometimes it's actually both. Where in the Love Bite book, there was where both individuals were actually people who've had alien abduction histories. And then in those cases, sometimes it was their alien handlers who were orchestrating to put those people together. And they weren't necessarily hosted by or possessed by an alien being, but they were highly influenced. But in, let's say, the Dark Side of Cupid book, which was a later book, that it was a similar dynamic, but it wasn't always clear what kind of beings were involved. And then that was clear, where some people were literally what I call hosted by one of these, like a snake-like being, a reptilian being, or some kind of demonic type that fed on loose energy or emotional and sexual energy. And then when that being was influencing and hosting them, sometimes it would be, instead of a full possession, it's almost like a partial possession, where they only possess during certain times. So that, let's say, the partner who's observing the hosted one, they will sometimes notice that, oh, they saw it like when they were having sex with them, for example. Then they saw like the entity like right there overshadowing, like, oh my God, like during sex, right?
Mm.
Or if someone got into a rage and got really pissed off, they just see their eyes turn into slits, or see like the snake-like image reflected, or just like this dark shadowy, or their eyes would turn black, like the classic demonic thing. So that has been observed, where and sometimes it's full-on hosting, and that's kind of a different dynamic. It's actually much worse when that's going on. And those kinds of people can engineer love relationships that follow the love bite type of pattern, where you feel like it's a twin flame, and it's a very, very strong connection. But I believe it's like the hosted one could be like a sorcerer or even a guru, like a spiritual guru, and they're playing guru. And they're really, hosted by Legion, right? Or God knows how many entities. Sometimes it's just a reptilian, but usually it's more than one, or they'll have a cluster of entities working through them. And then if somebody is clairvoyant and very perceptive, they're going to be able to pick up on that. So unfortunately, like these beings, and like say the reptilians, they're very good at manipulating sexual energy and kundalini energy. Even some demons and some sorcerers can do that too. So that the person who thinks it's their twin flame, they may feel a lot of bliss and a very strong obsession, and it may activate their heart chakra, activate past life memories or what they think are past life memories, which may or may not be true. But it's a very, very strong, powerful connection that's being engineered by somebody who knows how to do that. And unless you know what's happening, you really think that they're your twin flame. And then they have like the kundalini activation, the super psychic stuff, and it's just beyond belief, really, what happens.
And those people who are hosts to other entities, how does that happen? Do they do that voluntarily? Are they tricked into it? Or let's say, sometimes do not even know that they are doing that, or is it all of the above?
Well, I mean, it's all of the above, but some of them like really know, like in some books, well, even in a couple case histories in my Dark Side of Cupid book, one of the beings who was like the boyfriend, he knew he was hosted by a reptilian, and when they know they sometimes come out with this really super arrogant mockery flaunting, because they feel like the other person is under so much control that it doesn't matter and they could just tell the truth. And so some of them actually do know, and they let them know that they know, right? But in most cases, I think, like some people who are like sex addicts, for example, a lot of times they'll have an entity attached, and so they may not know fully, or maybe they know, that's how they're able easily to be good at what they do sexually, or to connect, or almost like they have this magnetic vampire attraction to the opposite sex, and then they can be very arousing for the other person because of their abilities, because this entity's working through them. And so sometimes they know, but they don't really, I don't think they know the full extent of their hosting unless enough people say, hey, I saw this being working through you in your image, So some of them don't know because they're just so unaware, and they're just so sex addicted. They don't even know that's what's working through them. But others actually do know. And there is a book, I think it was called Invasion of the Body Snatchers or something like that, by a woman named Susan Reed. And she was actually a MK Ultra monarch, a programmed person who'd been through the satanic ritual abuse. And she also had alien abductions and the typical MyLab SRA clinical picture. And so she was being handled by a boyfriend who was like a full-on reptilian host. And so in her book, she talked about like all the things that he talked about and what he admitted to, and the kinds of things that happen when that's the case. And it's pretty a severe situation. She didn't live through it. She actually died. But her book was very informative in terms of what you observe and what's really happening. And it's like there's a whole network of them who do this, and they network with each other. So they know who each other is. Like, it seems like the hosted ones know who each other is. And then they know if you're clairvoyant, they're like, they know. I don't know what it is. So you have to play like poker face. So so sometimes they target you because and you know what they're doing, and like really powerful Christians could offset that spiritually, so that they're, and they'll hate you for it. They'll hate you for it, Yeah.
It sounds a little bit as if the human relationship, the love relationships are predominantly targeted. And why is that? Is that an area where they can siphon off energy the most, or?
Yeah, in fact, I guess in the love bite, there was several reasons why I thought this was happening. And of course, that was within the alien abduction and my lab milieu, so to speak. But some people believe, and I believe this true, that if there really is a powerful love connection between two people, then that's a very powerful force. Anytime there's love, like true love and power in love, then that can offset a lot of demonic forces. And so, like if someone is powerful, it's almost like they can go through time and they could find out if somebody has a certain frequency signature that would be awake and be able to influence people maybe in a positive way to wake them up, like whistleblowers, for example. And then once they find out your frequency, or if you're doing too much whistleblowing, they're like, okay, we got to target and neutralize this person. So they send in a honeypot or a love bite setup or some kind of sorcery targeting situation. And then a lot of times they target them with a love bite. And so the love bite will seem like it's a twin flame or a good relationship or a good colleague working relationship, anything. And then it turns out to be one of these highly either hosted or influenced or mind controlled to take the other person out. Sometimes it's unconscious on the mind controlled person's part, but other times it's very conscious, where it's somebody from like an alphabet soup agency who's sent in to target someone who has too high of a frequency that's too awake or could cause an effect on people in a large scale. And they'll test them, or they'll try to neutralize them, or try to take them out, and then they'll throw you off your game for years with like a bad marriage, for example, or a bad love bite. And it's amazing that happens more often than not. So that's why I think it's really important to really know what is a healthy relationship and how to maintain something that's healthy and good, so that if one of these neutralizers comes along and you think it's your twin flame, your soulmate, you really need to challenge that person and what's working through them, as well as what might be working through you, so that you could nip it in the bud. And I think in our culture, seems like there's more women who tend to fall for this twin flame narrative, and that they're going to be this special goddess, Mary Magdalene thing with this tantric this, and they do this magic and create this wonderful powerful reality, whatever. But they're being used, and a lot of times they're being used by these predators who just I've seen it over and over and over again, and so they get thrown off with these things. So you just have to be really careful.
Those people who are infested with these reptilians or whatever entity it might be, sounds to me they would be perfect cult leaders.
Well, they're the ones who are causing the problems, right?
Mm.
But most people don't know. I think unless most people who are, let's say, psychic or clairvoyant or energy sensitive, or even have a high degree of emotional intelligence, will be able to read this relatively quickly.
Mm.
But in my case, let's say, I grew up in a certain family system where I had to shut down my feelings so that I could survive, because I went through trauma as well as alien abductions and the whole 9 yards. So that, when I got a love bite, the first one, it hit me over the head so hard that I didn't know what was happening, and I fell for it.
Mm.
And so it makes you wake up like, wow, how come I didn't know? Like, there's so many times where in our lives, maybe people who are more codependent or have that codependent relationship type of dynamic, they're always surprised, like, how come I didn't know that I was with, a predator or a psychopath or, a narcissist or a cheater or blah, blah, blah. And those red flags are switched off in unresolved trauma. So that it just tells you we need to really work on our hidden trauma so that we can wake up and have full awareness. So, and that lack of healing, or we've been conditioned to be abused because that's what's normal. In some cultures, it's normal just to be abused, right? Like in some cultures, women, it's like normal to be an abused, worthless piece of shit, right? Because just you're a woman. Right? So you normalize it, and then of course you're going to get abused because you normalize that. So you have to get past the normalization of what is in your culture or in your family or whatever, to be able to see through what's happening when it's happening. And sometimes it's pain and suffering that wakes us up. And then it's like, oh my God, I didn't know. I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
We're kids. getting active.
Yeah, she always acts up when I'm sitting here, because before that she was sleeping, but of course now she has
Yeah.
to be on the show.
Well, it's funny because one of the things that we learned on the side was that cats are reptilian busters. Like certain animals are really energy sensitive, but they can basically see ghosts and see spirits and stuff.
Mm.
So actually, cats were like good reptilian busters. You ever notice like they hate lizards and they'll always try to like chase them and stuff? But they'll act that same way when there's a reptilian around, you know, or they're actually good to pick up on things, as well as some dogs too. So it's a good way to test the people you're dating, right?
Yeah, and I call these two my astral guardians.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, some people say all of that is nonsense. It's all demonic. There is no such thing as aliens. And what would you say?
Well, it depends on how you classify demonic. I think demonic is kind of like a polarized term
Mm,
that might explain, you know, the overall energy dynamic of whatever's operating. But in the alien abduction category, there's actually many different kinds of beings that are reported, both physical and interdimensional, in terms of like a whole spectrum of, you know, from what they think is clearly malevolent to those that are benevolent. So you really have to look at, you know, what is their energy signature, and, you know, what are they doing? How are they affecting you? And are they energy vampires? And are they shapeshifters? And how do they affect you in your life in terms of your overall path in life? Um, and knowing really the nature of deception, because I think those who are deliberately deceiving and feeding on energy are definitely more on the demonic realm of energy signature,
mhm,
although they may be, you know, taking on, you know, the reptilian form or a Draco form or insectoid form or alien gray form or a tall white or whatever. So there's a whole different, like there's so many different ones that are reported, it's actually confusing. But I mean, I'd say it's demonic, but I think even demonic and alien are actually two different things,
mhm,
because demons will like a lot of times they'll disappear when you do a prayer or when you do like a exorcism kind of thing or a spirit releasement, and they will maybe disappear because they're interdimensional, whereas if there is an alien that actually has a physical form, they're going to operate differently.
mhm.
So yeah.
Okay. So when you said that sometimes people are targeted that are too switched on, is that, let's say, they are being targeted with an alien love bite, with a really, really complicated, exhausting
Yeah.
relationship? Is
Uh-huh.
that to nudge them off mission?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think it depends on the person. Like if the person is really focused on, you know, to be the best person they can be according to their beliefs in God, that ultimately it works out for the greater good if they continue on the path of being very persistent to discover the truth and to have like a purity of intention, right? But there's some people get thrown off completely. And I mean, I've seen people who've gone through channeling cults where they thought they were in contact with benevolent space beings and they were doing healing work and getting clients and doing different kinds of things, but they were being completely deceived by false light beings. And then behind the scenes, these beings were actually controlling and manipulative and carrying out an agenda in order to basically harvest as many people as possible. So you have to be careful with that. A lot of the new age stuff, that it made me question things, you know, that there was so many that were, you know, the false light, the whole false light routine. It's pretty rampant.
Hmm. Um, Going back a little bit to that twin flame theme, I'm not denying that it is impossible that there are twin flames, but I have a strong feeling this is totally overhyped.
Yeah, I think so.
And there are so many people that tell themselves. that this is my twin flame. But what I see happening is that it sets you up minimum for, let's say, a narcissistic relationship, because you always have this excuse, oh, these relationships are supposed to be complicated and exhausting.
Yeah.
And then you stay and stay and stay, and you're getting drained and drained and drained.
Yeah. Like the whole justification. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Like I remember reading about like the twin flame thing, and one of them was, oh, he's the twin flame runner, and he's like running away, and it's the attachment style of the narcissist, where it's push pull, and they just play all kinds of games because they're run by entities and they're unresolved complex traumas, and they're just hurting people. That's just what they do. And it's like these codependent idiots who are making excuses for assholes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we have to stop making excuses, thinking, it's just normal. They just do that. You have to be spiritually evolved and take it. And then you just get completely destroyed. I don't know. I guess I've taken a hardline thing now because, there's no excuse for bullshit behavior. And if somebody's doing that kind of crap in a relationship, that needs to be nipped in the bud, because it's not okay. It's not okay to be a goddamn narcissist who causes harm to other people. Plain and simple. So
exactly.
That's how I see it. It's like, no, quit making excuses for the assholes and call them on their game or leave them. Just stop falling for that shit. Sorry, I've been through too much. You know what I mean? It's just,
yeah. Would you say it would be a good idea to have a smart exit strategy from such a relationship, be it with a narcissist or an alien love bite situation? Would you say it's smart to have that strategy, that you come out of that unscathed as much as possible?
it's probably hard to come out of it unscathed in terms of the experience is very profound, even for both people sometimes. So
yeah, what I mean is, some narcissists, if they sense that you are ready to jump ship, they can get really violent.
Oh, well, that's true. That's true. And you have to be wise in how you do that in terms of, doing well. And when you do the no contact abruptly and they know it, then they can go on their punishing tactics and try to hurt you with the smear campaigns or the abuse. So you have to be careful. And I would just say it depends on the person. Like if they're violent and they might hurt you, like it's almost like you have to discover what they are before you make anything obvious. Like it depends on, if you're married to the person, or if you're working with someone and you can't really get away, like even if it's a family member or somebody you can't really get away from, you just have to play poker face on an emotional level and try not to let their behaviors get to you, and build your support system so that you don't react. Actually, you don't react in the normal human ways, which would be try to get them to take responsibility for themselves, or to confront them, or to do like compassionate communication with a narcissist doesn't work, because they're never sincere. They will hurt you because that's what they want to do, because that's who they are. So therefore, you're dealing with an enemy. I hate to say it in black and white terms, but you're dealing with somebody who doesn't play fair. They know how to fight better than you do. Therefore, you must take an entirely different strategy of communications and behaviors, because you're dealing with somebody who will harm you when they have the chance. So therefore, you have to protect yourself in such a way that you kind of ease off. You don't let them know. You play poker face. You do like a strategy where, because you understand their psychology. And then you ease out of it, or just kind of make sure you're like really boring, like you be the gray rock, right? You just become really boring to them. You can't feed off your energy anymore. Oh gosh, they're just so boring to them. Isn't that great? They don't want to be around you. So it's better that way to do it. I would ease off of it instead of doing an abrupt, because when you're abrupt, they always know. Plus, it's like they're hosted. I mean, this is classic. It was in the Love Bite. I know in the Dark Side of Cupid, there's a case in there where somebody figured out, they're hosted by a demon or a reptilian or whatever it was, and the moment that she decided to break up with him, then he would text back and start hoovering. So it's almost like they have this supernatural knowing on another level. Like when you're ready to jump ship, then they'll try to hoover you back in through the supernatural game playing and the dreams and the, the demonic stuff. So you have to know how they play the game so that you can ease off and, just do no contact or change the nature of the relationship. Yeah. It's too
Yeah.
bad. No, it's really sad. But I think it's the education is really important to understand the nature of when you're dealing with a personality disordered person like that, or if somebody's hosted, that you're not going to get what you want and what you need out of the relationship with those kinds of people.
Mm.
And you need to know that so that you don't harm yourself by, basically showing your cards. Like you don't want to be talking about your feelings and your vulnerabilities to them when they're going to turn around and use it against you, right? Unfortunately, that's what they do. So there's a lot of YouTube channels on the whole narcissistic abuse recovery program and how to, get smart.
Yeah, that's true. I like one in particular, that's Richard Grannon.
I was just thinking of him. He's
Oh,
very good.
really? And because what?
Supernatural stuff. He doesn't really talk about the supernatural stuff, but I
No.
suspect he probably knows, but maybe he puts it in a different context, you know. But his stuff has been helpful for me, and learning about like the complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and how to manage that when that's going on.
Yeah. We already talked a little bit about shadow work, healing our own wounds.
Yeah.
And I think that too, that the more you work on yourself and the more you have released your own trauma, have integrated it, and it's really, let's say, resolved and not just pushed down into the subconscious, you are not that attractive to either one of them, the narcissist or the alien love bite. Would that be correct?
Sometimes you still are attractive to them.
Because of it, as a challenge?
Oh, I don't know if it's because, but sometimes like they say that a lot of narcissists are attracted to like people who have intelligence or talents. And in the alien love bite, they're going to try to attack someone who actually has a lot of qualities and good potential. But if they see that there's wounds there, then that's the first place they go to try to disempower that person or to neutralize them. But I have noticed that, once you don't, give them the responses that they're looking for an easy predatorial interaction, then they may leave you alone, because a lot of times they're actually, what's that word? Cowards. They're cowards. They really don't want someone to see them for what they are. And so they'll leave you alone, or they'll do a discard or a smear campaign depending on, your relationship with them, because they don't want you to know, and they don't want others to know what they really are, but they're projecting on everybody else, so yeah.
So I know that in the DSM there are, I guess, over 50 traits of narcissists, but for me personally, I always boil it down to the 3 big E's, and that would be lack of empathy, exploitation, and entitlement.
That's good. Yeah.
So to make it manageable, yeah, because not every narcissist is checking every box, of course, and but those traits, that is something to look out for, because that will be there no matter what, no matter if he or she checks all the other ones. So do we have something like that in the alien love bite situation as well, where we could say, okay, when we boil it down, we should look out for those patterns?
Yeah, and I think in the dark side of Cupid, I did a thing where we called it the dark triad, or the unholy triad of the dark side of Cupid. And I tried to make it simple so that if they had two of the three, then it was most likely a dark side of Cupid. What was it now? Oh my God, I have to go back in my book. But one of them had to do the high level of the supernatural element, the emotional highs, crashing lows, and the emotional manipulation factor, and then the supernatural elements. And God, I should remember this stuff. But yeah, it was two of the three. Then it's a dark side of Cupid, where there was a lot of the supernatural thing going on. But it was the emotional manipulation factor, which really determined, which is really the entitlement and the manipulation, the control, which, you know, is malevolent, right? It's the personality disordered, malevolent, energy vampire kind of situation. So it really is similar. But with the alien love bite, there is definitely the presence of certain kinds of alien or ET beings that have been involved in that person's life over many times, that take them regularly or do a medical experimentation, or they're really in a project and they really have had the UFO thing. So that is almost like a different signature, but I found that the same kind of narcissistic patterns still persist in at least those aliens that are the malevolent ones, or the military programs that are trying to utilize that person as an operative, and they will want to keep them under control and handled by a handler, which tends to be a controlling and manipulative person. So it's very similar. Like anybody who wants to try to control and manipulate somebody else against their waking up has, I think, a nefarious agenda and will display those characteristics anyway, you know. So
When you said handler, I automatically thought of intelligence services like CIA, KGB,
yes.
so on and so forth. Do you think they work with um, other, yeah, let's say aliens or other entities? They work with them? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Mhm.
that's what we found out. That certainly those that are, let's say, the satanic bloodlines, where they're the high level, you know, blood oath people, then they may be involved with military and intelligence and other agencies, which will, you know, traumatize, mind control people. So they're working in cahoots with certain beings that they've made blood oaths to, that they may even invoke from other dimensional realities. So that's what we found in the MyLab projects. A lot of them were basically Satanists, or like the Nazi Black Sun worshippers.
Mhm.
There was that going on, like in some of the secret space program, but really MK Ultra is MK Ultra. If you go down, it's usually satanic ritual abuse bloodlines, which had the original secrets that were then taken up by people in military positions, or even the Nazi paperclip kind of thing. So really, it all goes down to the satanic bloodlines that had these secrets of mind control since ancient times. And then they would have, you know, connections with certain beings that would give them secrets. Like this is kind of complex, but there are some people who reported they would be taken by, let's say, military who are in these secret projects. They know they're mind controlled operatives or victims, whatever you want to call it. But then the handler, the higher level of hierarchy control, went above the humans into the non-human other alien or extraterrestrial or reptilian or whatever beings would be the higher in control, so that they were actually handled like their handler, right? Their handler and their controller wasn't a human being. It was the reptilian or the Draco or the whatever. And so the highest hierarchy was the non-human, higher intelligent beings. So sometimes they're handled directly and mind controlled directly by those other beings, not the humans. But the humans may have different jobs, depending on, you know, what they're being used for.
So
So that's what tells you.
I would assume that the regular recruit, the beginner at the CIA or wherever, is not aware of those things
Yeah,
usually.
it depends on when they were hired and if they've been groomed, because a lot of them are groomed from childhood. So the ones that are groomed from childhood, who are in the hierarchy families or the
Mhm.
bloodline families, they will have more of a grooming conditioning. And then, oh, you know, they just get hired, but really, you know, it's been going on all their life. Like I've known people who they were in, let's say, the FBI, or they were in some of these organizations, but they've been an abductee their whole life. So they were groomed, and they think, oh, just because they get a job later in the adult years, they've been groomed all along to be working for them.
Mm.
So that's why it's almost like once you get it, you realize that there's some who maybe they're not hierarchy bloodline abductees, and maybe they're hired later in life, but they're certainly influenced by these forces, whether they know it or not. But the highest level ones, they're groomed from childhood in certain families. Like, for example, there's been people that we know, James Bartley and I, when they would have what we call the classic military abduction. Sometimes they would see aliens in these different bases and these experiences. But let's say they had a stint in the army, and then they had like a regular job in the army, whatever their I don't know what, if they were officers or whatever. But then underneath that, then they would have another level of operatives. So they would be undercover as one job in the military, like the regular military, but undercover, they're a secret operative on another secret project that's covered up, but they're still in the army or one of these military branches. But the reason why they took them undercover was because they were an abductee from childhood. So they're groomed. And then they may get in the Navy or the Army or whatever later in life, but then that is sometimes a cover for the deeper cover they're already doing all along. You see what I'm saying?
Mm.
So
Mm.
that tends to happen. And then some of them are actually direct alien operatives, and they have special abilities based on how they've been groomed and controlled and handled or whatever, or trained. And then they have like super abilities, and then the aliens are their handlers, not the humans.
So I would think that that is compartmentalized, yeah, that information. And it's probably not in the official manual of the CIA and
Yeah,
so forth. And
I think
so at what
yeah,
level do you think people really know what's going on?
it depends. Well, I think people who are from the bloodline families who have come out from under the control and
Mhm.
who basically fought against it probably have the highest level of control because they're in the hierarchy families. They actually know more than maybe somebody in the NSA, for example,
Mm.
depending on their job. So usually the ones who know how the Illuminati run, how everything, will know more than somebody who's just like a low-level FBI or a NSA or even a CIA. But most of them are already groomed, especially those in high positions. So I wouldn't
So
have known this.
in other words, somebody who doesn't have a clue at all would certainly not become CIA director.
No, it's usually somebody who's groomed and has already
Mm.
made a blood oath.
Okay.
And usually the CIA families tend to be the more nasty ones, like even in all this stuff that's going on with the election fraud and the different alphabet soup agencies. It's as if the CIA have been cut out to be the more malevolent, deep state oriented alphabet soup agency, whereas some in the NSA are a little bit not so bad, but all of them at some level must know. Like in the QAnon movement, they certainly make it as if they definitely know. They're calling it deep state, which would be the black checkerboard square Luciferian aspects, which are the Baal worshiping Babylonian satanic hierarchy elite, basically, who are mind controlling everything through their operations. But in reality, there's some that we call the light checkerboard square Luciferian ones, which have the appearance of not being so bad, but they're still part of the same overall game. So that's where it gets a little bit confusing, and you wouldn't know unless, like, I wouldn't have never known this unless I ran across people who were in the military abductions and the satanic ritual abuse bloodlines to tell me, no, this is how it works, and this is why this happens, and this is why that happens. And I wouldn't
Mm.
have known unless I worked with people over time, because as I started out, I didn't think that there were that as much malevolence in the world as I realized later there was. And it's kind of a hard thing to learn. It makes it sound like it's all negative, and I don't wanted to make it sound like it's all negative. There are some really good people out there who are fighting the good fight, and who are some benevolent beings who are interceding. But I think they keep themselves secret, and they don't make a big thing about it, and they just don't make a big deal out of it, you know.
Mm. Do you think it was your own experience that made you look into that subject? Let's say, and digging down to understand what has happened to me, and in that process, you started working with others.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because in my own experience, there was, both negative and positive elements of what I thought was ET encounters, and definitely alien abduction, but also trauma that had to do with abuse from someone who was a high-level Freemason, who was involved with a, aerospace company, military industrial complex. So there was a personality disordered parent who was in a high-level occult organization, probably under mind control as well, who abused us. And so that, made me wake up to, wait a minute, there's this shady area that's with, ETs, but then you still got this military industrial complex, malevolent, shady behaviors, which is, evil behaviors. Let's just call it for what it is. Like, so I had to see that there was a dichotomy here. Like, if these aliens throughout my life, for example, were all benevolent, why would I display such trauma and incongruence in what I was believing and what was the reality in my relationships, and then how I was raised and what I was believing? So I had to look at all of that and really reassess, the level of trauma and the level of relationship dysfunctionality and toxic stuff, and then get out from under that, and then realize what was there. And then once I did, I had to reassess everything. So that's why I think, assessing healthy relationships is really important. And you could actually put the other stuff even aside and say, as long as these, relationship dynamics of ethics and integrity are happening, then you're on a better path of not attracting or being as victimized by some of these dark forces, which are there's truly supernatural dark forces and secret organizations which do things to people that are secret, that most people have not a clue about. And it's only now that people are starting to understand that there's a lot of these nefarious things going on in the technologies of, hurting people and controlling them. So yes, it definitely made me question everything. And I'm not as naive as I was maybe 20 years ago. And I think that if some being in some group is going to make claims that, oh, they're all benevolent and they're here to, rescue us, and, I would make them really take a look at their own lives and the evidence behind these groups, and to really question everything. Because I've seen so many that were, it's like I've seen people who were traumatized that really wanted to believe all these things, but behind the scenes, like, they were doing the opposite. Or for people who were clairvoyant or had extrasensory perception, they would see somebody who's, let's say, in the community with a big mission statement, who's really famous, doing all these things that look good, but they're completely hosted by reptilians, right? So it's like, wait a minute, there's an incongruence here. How come people who can perceive these things, and then they're saying all these wonderful things, but they're friggin' a reptilian host? You know what I mean? Like a big channel or a big hoo-ha in the UFO community or whatever, and they're like friggin' reptilians, and they're doing all this shit behind the scenes. So that's the kind of thing that gets you targeted. It's like when you know that, like, a big important person who's putting out this, good persona, and you find out, like, they're their host,
Yeah.
So those are the things that we discovered, as we learned. And that's kind of funny, really. I mean, we talk about that in the book, what James Bartlett and I discovered. And, like, operatives would come in from the intelligence agencies, even, who would come into the New Age community and go to these conferences, way back when we could do them in person. And they would, have a book that they came out about some positive ET channeling, wonderful, good feely thing. And then they were a total operative sent to infect the, the research community with a false narrative. so that they could, put in their infectors and create a controlled opposition or something. And we saw this going on over and over again,
Mm.
so yeah.
Yeah. And I also find that some of these so-called ascension symptoms, yeah, when you go through these lists, depending on what you are reading there, some of those lists, I have to say, oh my goodness, you are in for a mental breakdown if you do not address all these issues that are mentioned there. And you are telling yourself, oh, I'm ascending.
Yeah, it's hard to know. But I'd say that if you are experiencing, yeah, I mean, when you're being vampirized, for example, you will have a lot of weird health problems
Mm-hmm.
and supernatural dreams and this and that. So that's something to watch for, and to always stay balanced and healthy and solid, and not make excuses for things, just to really find out like as much as you can. Never assume that somebody is your twin flame or yeah. God, I mean, I have stories that I don't want to give you the bad stories. I mean, because they're not even all in my book. Actually, there's some people that I've interviewed who were part of, let's say, they were positive healing people who were more considered new agey, but they were like energy healers who worked with frequencies and herbs and different things. And then somebody would walk into their, or basically, I call it infect, but they would enter to their group of healers or their community, and try to basically get a job helping other healers or something, or say that they're a ET walk-in, for example, and that they're here to heal, and they have all these technologies and they channel these higher level beings, blah blah blah. And then they basically have an agenda to destroy a particular spiritual healing community. And so I wrote an interview about that with somebody that happened in the mountains of North Carolina, where it was this man who was an ex-military, whatever, secret project, who claimed to be an ET walk-in. He was just full of demons. And then he was basically sent under control to infect these communities. And then one of the women that he worked with, ended up dying of cancer, and all these people started having like bad health problems. So he was basically infecting these healer communities under the guise of being these positive ET walk-ins. And they were like, bad. And so it was a really good interview, actually, because it showed, the kinds of things that he was trying to train this young man to do, which was to prepare him to become a host for a friggin' entity. Okay, so they're preparing him for possession. So when you look at this for what it is, it's like, oh my God, are you kidding me? So yeah, it's good to just, really investigate and assess the energy signature of these people, and look at, their histories and the relationships, and do an investigation.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
I have to say we have some really interesting internet issues.
right now, really. Oh
Yeah, the entire time.
no.
Your image, usually it's over the full screen, but it's always going woot, woot.
Are you kidding? Oh
Yeah, but
no.
the thing is, Zoom will balance that out. In the final product, it will not to be seen, but then when it goes, it always tells me, Eve Logan's internet connection is not stable enough.
Oh goodness. It's fine on my end, actually, here.
But
But
it sometimes happens with some guests. I have the really creepy experiences concerning the internet, I mean.
Mhm.
So,
Well, goodness. I could show you both books, by the way. This one's The Dark Side of Cupid. This is the second book that was published 2012. So this is about relationships that have had the supernatural signature of, let's say, a relationship being affected by a third party entity, one or both partners or somebody who's hosted, and it kind of has that narcissistic, supernatural, weird stuff going on, like the vampire-y kind of thing. And then the love bite, the one that I showed earlier, is the original one that was done with all the people in the case histories who reported it had some kind of alien abduction history. So they had these histories that happened more than once. So usually if you're somebody who has an alien encounter or an abduction, in my book at least, they were people who had multiple encounters or abductions, which means they're in a project, you know? So it's a certain kind of individual.
Do you have any idea how they pick people for projects?
Well, I think some of it's genetics.
Mhm.
Come to find out that, at least in the Americas, we thought that there was some kind of where there was a connection to some kind of royalty bloodline, but
Mhm.
also with Cherokee and Native American lines, where there was a mix. And a lot of the Native American ones, I learned later that one of the reasons they took these people and experimented on them was because they had a high degree of astral power, or more of the spiritual kinds of characteristics. They were more psychic, or they had certain qualities that other lines did not have. And they wanted to utilize and hone these people for either experimentation or to use them as operatives in some of these secret projects, like as a remote viewer, or somebody who has different qualities, like spiritual qualities, like opening portals, for example. So I think it depends on the agenda of the who's taking them. But it seems to me that one of the things that I learned is they always had some kind of psychic ability or quality that was unique. And one of the things was Rh negative bloodline, but it wasn't always what was prominent. But I think those who had that bloodline were maybe better to be used in hybrid pregnancies, where there would be less of a chance of the pregnancy rejection because of the Rh negative blood. And that was another thing. So, yeah.
What is it about the human race that so many want to meddle here and manipulate and are on a power trip and control trip? What is that? Where's that coming from?
I think there's a lot of strains and lines that maybe we don't even know of.
Mm-hmm.
Some say that they're trying to take out, like the people who were the original line, Adam and Eve, the Sethian line, the non-Cain lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ones that they're trying to take out. And then some think that, oh, if there was a bloodline that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had, then they're trying to trace that and hone it and control it and then utilize it as their own resource. So it seems like if there's a bloodline that has a lot of power in it for a positive potential or a powerful potential, then the ones who know what frequency to look for, either through a genetic signature or even a frequency type of technology, then they will hone in on it and, abduct that person and follow them throughout their life, and then try to control and turn them for whatever purposes the groups want. So I've run into people like, they're always saying, well, why me? I don't understand, what are they trying to do? And I think they want to control and utilize certain lines that have certain characteristics that they could use for power or experimentation. And sometimes they know before we know who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always good to, be your best person, but for your own intentions, not to be used by someone else who's taking advantage of you.
I
You know,
sometimes have the feeling they know when we are coming in, who we
they do.
are.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had that reported by somebody close to me who came in lucid through, I don't want to call it a Stargate, but it's a type of interdimensional portal of entrance into this reality. And then most of them, like the archons in the Gnostic literature, they know, right? They know which heavens you come through, and you're tagged. So they know and control you, when you get in here. But there's some that come through back doors, which only exist for that moment in time and space, and then they disappear. And then if you're not under the program, they'll tag you and like, what are you doing here? And then they'll like hone in on you and abduct you your whole life. So I think they know who has a higher frequency signature. If you're here for a certain reason, they just read it. They can read it. They have technologies that read it. And then they just try to control you as much as possible while you're here. So I think that's good for us to wake up and to really question all authorities that are
Mm-hmm.
trying to manipulate us and trying to use us to carry out their agenda. and really question, you know.
In the Catholic Church, when they deal with exorcisms, there comes a point they say, um, I don't know if it's correct or if it's wrong, I don't really care, but they say there comes a point when you do not exorcise the entity early enough, then it merges with the host, and then you can no longer separate them.
Ooh.
That is the, yeah, let's say the last step. Have you ever encountered somebody that is no longer absolutely no longer in control of their own mind, and has lost it?
Well, I suspect so.
Mm-hmm.
Although the ones who are completely hosted, like possessed, they would not come for help, because they're fully under the agenda and the power and control of the entity or the demon working through them. So they won't look for help. But I have come across people who seem to be unable to fight off and get rid of an entity, and they seem like completely powerless and they can't be helped. So some people can't be helped. But usually the people looking for help, I think they're not fully, I don't think they're fully possessed and they can be helped. But I think once the full-on hosting takes place, it's more difficult. And I remember reading the book by Malachi Martin. There was two by Scott Peck, who is now deceased. He was a therapist who actually knew Malachi Martin during a time in his life where he was doing classic deliverance and exorcisms. And he learned a lot that Malachi Martin talked about. And I know that, I think it was Malachi Martin's book. I don't even remember the name of it. I don't know, something of the devil. But there was a point in which he knew, and this is something we learned all along just by kind of observing, like somebody who's fully hosted, like in the Susan Reed book that I talked about earlier, of the invasion of the body snatchers, where she had a boyfriend who was like a full-on reptilian hybrid host who is like fully possessed and will not become depossessed. And then they have a certain signature and behavior. And so I remember Malachi Martin talking about how, you know, what happens inside the person when they become oppressed and when they become possessed. And the possession, there's a whole different thing going on. And that basically they're doing the agenda, they're the full-on, they're not human anymore, more or
Okay.
less. And
So
so
they
they
just
have
have a
different,
human form, but other than that,
yeah. And the ones who are fighting it, they will still have a voice that's fighting inside, and they will hear the voice in a certain way, like the demon voice, but there's still the potential for them to get out from under it. But it is a battle though, once it really gets in there, which is why, I mean, I have come to, after doing the work that I do, I have come to find that the power and name of Jesus Christ is the most powerful for depossession work, and that there really is a truth in the original figure through history known as Jesus Christ, who maybe had a different name in Hebrew, that really does have that power. And I've seen it at work, and I know it's true. So that's why now, I mean, like, I don't bother trying to do spirit releasements unless I work with the name and power of Jesus Christ. And then that person must do whatever is necessary in terms of, if you want to be clean of this influence, then basically following the same principles which would keep you clean from these kinds of demonic infestations. So really it would be like, okay, you know, you got to work on the healing the trauma, you got to work on any addictions, any bad behaviors, or basically the basic 10 commandments and basic ethical principles of living. Really, no killing, no stealing, you know, don't act like a narcissist. Which is why when I look at it now, like, people who have narcissistic personality disorder are at a disadvantage for becoming possessed, I truly believe now, based on their behaviors. And that's because they exited their original state in terms of the trauma made them, they never got out from under their trauma, and they created like a fake persona that's not connected to the true core of their spirit, so that they have their personality as a satellite of different personalities just to be a fake person, while the real one is still like shriveled up in a shame core that they won't let out. So it's easy for them to be like a candle in the wind. They don't have a steady state, so they're not connected. So they get easily hosted,
Mm.
basically. And it's people who describe that, like some people who understand psychology don't add in the supernatural element of the whole demonic possession element. But even people who understand psychology and the cluster Bs, like the bad narcissistic, even the covert ones, they know the reason why they don't operate the same way is because they haven't even developed a real personality. It's a fake personality.
Mm.
So that's why it's like, wow, once you realize what they are, you have to just kind of take a different strategy in behaving and working around them. But I think that, once you get right with God, whatever you want to call it, and you really start employing your own spiritual power and the power of the greater good, that it offsets the demon inside them. If there is one, they're going to know, and they're going to immediately like either punish you or smear campaign you, or basically, discard you immediately. They won't be able to handle the power working through you or what knows,
Mhm.
because they have to hide. They have to hide, you know?
Another phenomena that is, yeah, it's quite prevalent, but it's not so much talked about, and it's not really enjoyable, the subject, but I think it needs to be addressed. That is astral rape.
Oh, yes. I did a show on that. Well, that was actually a big part of the false twin flame
Yeah.
Side Cupid thing, where it was like, oh my God, like people would think, oh, he's my twin flame, and it would be somebody that they know. They might email him, or it could be like a celebrity figure, but they feel a very strong connection, and they're like having these dreams with them, and they complete astral connection that's very real. And that's actually very prevalent. That happens a lot. The whole
Mm.
astral thing, it's a big deal now.
Yeah. And would you agree that even sometimes, let's say, you dream at night, you're dreaming about somebody that you know, and you have never been sexually involved with that person, but out of the blue you have that dream, but in reality there might be a reptilian behind that that is taking that form of this person. Would you agree to that? Is
Oh,
that
definitely.
possible?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I've had that happen actually. And
Mm.
there was a case in the Dark Side of Cupid where James James Bartley and I talked about it on one of his shows, about we call it the Mary Henry case, but in the book it's Mariah and the seductive spirit guide. And in that particular case, it was a postmark, what do you call it, a poster board case for all the different elements which are actually connected to one another, that many people may not see or think there may be a connection. And in her case, she had the classic alien and UFO abduction with the medical things and with certain kinds of beings, had certain appearances. And then she started doing automatic writing, because that being that was coming through her was like this dead guitar country player that she had a fancy with, that had a love song that triggered her. Anyway, this being was pretending to be her lover that was this dead country singer, but it was really like a shape-shifting reptilian. And
Mm.
then when she was channeling, she would be channeling not only that being who would literally play the guitar through her body, right? Like possess her, and then she'd play guitar, and then she would have like full-on sexual experiences. And in some of these experiences, it would be like as if the being is there physically, but they're invisible. And that in some cases that I've had reported to me, where there's usually a reptilian involved, they take on the fourth dimensional or whatever, but it's more etheric in terms of a density. And that, so if the being is interacting with them sexually, even though they're invisible, they feel it as if it's fully physical. They may have physical effects in terms of bodily excretions, let's put it that way. And then let's say they remove an arm or a limb, like invisibly, like something's moving invisibly, the bed will go down like an invisible force kind of thing. So those kind of things happened in several of the cases that were reported to me, where there was much more, you know, supernatural weirdness going on with the
Mm-hmm.
sexual thing. And so unfortunately they're good at that, and doing the flatteries, and you know, providing like a lonely woman with, you know, attention and love and sexual experience if she's having like a bad marriage, and then they get addicted to this, and then it may progress. In the case that was reported, and this was Barbara Bartholick's case that she gave me, that I finally put in the book later, but it progressed into, first she was channeling the spirit guide who was a dead country guitar player, singer. And then it would progress into, oh, these ET light beings who would come through also in the channeling. First it was one being, then it was another, then it was a group. And then before she knew it, she would have these full-on astral or sexual experiences where a whole group of these beings would show up, not just the ETs, but some that would seem to be related to certain of the ETs that were in her former abduction experience. Then they would be like dressed in these black robes, doing these Wittersham sexual rituals, like on a rock, while, you know, like crazy shit, right? So it basically it escalated into a greater window being open for invasive demonic entrance in her reality, where pretty soon she was hearing voices, and like demonic voices telling her to do things like pour hot coffee over her kids, until she basically had to call a priest to do an exorcism, but he couldn't do the exorcism, so she had to go to like a mental health facility, you know, under drugs for like a week before she was able to normalize this demonic possession.
Mm.
And it all happened through all these series of events that actually started with a classic alien abduction by supposedly benevolent beings. So this is what this case, like when it first came across Barbara Bartholick's research in the 90s, that it was too hardcore information that brought together too many elements that were very uncomfortable realities for people to even consider as being connected. So in the early days, people wanted just the nuts and bolts, right, of the UFO abduction experience that had maybe to do with medical stuff. And well, they might be benevolent, you know, spirit guides who were talking about the rapture and this special job she would have as an ambassador for the human race, like the whole thing, right? And then it
Mm.
turned out to be this like complete demonic mess.
Mm.
You know, and a love bite, right? And there was a love bite involved, and it happened to be with this guitar player who she realized later it was a shape-shifting reptilian. So, but at the time, like Barbara couldn't even present these things at conferences. And when she did, way back, let's say in the mid 90s, when some of these other people were getting very famous about certain big projects that said, oh, there's no such thing as negative aliens. That's all the military. There's only good BETs. People saying things like that, who basically poo-pooed her off the stage and told her there's no such thing as negative reptilians.
Yeah, yeah.
So she had to basically keep a lot of her research under the lid, except when Dr. Carla Turner came out and wrote 3 books, which were very revelatory on the more military and the reptilian and the more negative elements, which it's unpopular, but you know, people have to put it out all on the table to say, this is everything that's presenting. We can't, you know, take this out or take that out or try to make it look like this or try to make it look like that. We have to, you know, put everything on the table. And this is what Barbie did, and why she was such a good mentor, because she helped me understand things that if it had not been for her, I might have been taken out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I have to give her gratitude for everything that she showed me.
Mm.
And, you know, not be, there's people out there who want to believe certain things in order to feel like things maybe are better than they are. But you always have to take a look at everything that's presenting.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, my personal feeling is there are a lot of shitty races out there. And I know that there are also good beings in what I call shitty races. And not every ET race is shitty. But I hate it that, you know, they think they are entitled to manipulate us, to meddle in our affairs. to make that history takes a different direction than what it could have been, and so on and so forth. And in that respect, I see a lot of traits of narcissists in them.
That's a good point, because I think that if once you can see that for what it is, regardless of the person or the being, then you'll know the energy signature. And this is why it's good to, like, okay, what is a benevolent, good, mutual relationship of respect? Even if it's two adults or a parent and a child or a sibling or a work relationship, that you will know, right, by the energy signature of it.
Yeah.
And so even if you apply it to other beings from other places, if they exhibit certain things, then, you have to ask the question, what is their intention? And although there might be some who are doing things behind the scenes, like I would say it's not black and white, even in the, I hate to call it the MyLabby stuff, but I think not everything is completely black and white. It's kind of like, the Stargate SG-1 series, or even like this whole Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., since it's on Netflix now, but they show like the continuum of different kinds of operations and beings that are interacting, so that things aren't always black and white, and that sometimes you have to keep certain things under the radar in order to affect the operation, like a successful mission. And it might be that it would be too dangerous for it to be out in the public domain, based on the kinds of technologies they use or the kinds of beings that they're fighting against. So that's why some things maybe need to be kept under the radar based on what's really happening, except for those who truly understand and know what's at stake, and then they'll know how to manage it. So I'm not, let's say, justifying secrecy and bad behaviors. It's just that, over time, you'll come to know that, is somebody ready to hear something, and what is their level of, where are they out psychologically and emotionally and spiritually and educationally, so that they can handle a certain information, or like knowing that technology really is 50 to 100 to 200 years beyond what we have, and that there's certain things that have been going on a long time, and can they handle that? Like, can people handle the reality of ETs, or can they handle, like, even in the elections in the US, like, because of my work that I've done with not only the alien abductions, but the secret weird stuff, right? And the SRA and all that, I came to find out the secrets, everybody's secrets, even high level secrets. So when you see the regular population, they don't know what's behind, for example, the election fraud, or what the deep state is doing, or the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, the mind control, Most people don't have a clue, right? So if they found out all at once, they might have like a really big shock. They would have a hard time managing that knowledge and information.
They might even mentally shut down.
Yeah, like in the Matrix, they'll defend the Matrix because they want to believe everything's going to be okay and back to normal, and they don't want to know how many times their world has been threatened into extinction, and how many people have had to intervene to prevent like things that you couldn't imagine. So that's what I'm just trying to say, that there's so much that most people don't know, and that's why they're believing a false narrative. It's easy for them to believe false narrative because they weren't exposed to the information and the experiences of knowing how things really are on these secret levels, unfortunately.
And even with that corona situation here, I have a strong feeling that a lot of people out there, they do not want to fathom what is going on. When it comes to, am I being afraid of a virus, or do I have to fear my government? They choose the virus that is more comfortable. You know what I mean? Because that realization, oh, the government really doesn't give a shit about us, that is hard to swallow for many people. If you're used to that thought, then no big deal. But if you are not in that group, then that will really hit you over the head.
Just like a love bite. Like if I thank God that I learned about it through Barbara Bartholomew, that had I not known, I may not have survived. So it's the same psychology, really. Like, if you have been through a narcissistic relationship, then you'll know what it's like, right? But people who have not a clue, they can really get hurt,
Mm.
And I've known people who were like within the context of the dark side of Cupid or alien love bite, that they were basically normal people who didn't go through a lot of trauma, like normies, right? They weren't like some weird history, but then they had one of these relationships, and they stated to me that this was the most mm, difficult emotionally and energetically and on all levels, even compared to a singular like rape situation. A
Mm.
single violent rape was less traumatic than a dark side acute love bite kind of thing in terms
Mm.
of trauma and its effects. And this is from somebody who was normal, who didn't have the classic abuse histories that might predispose them to being more of a victim. So it tells you that, the extent of this is very, very difficult, more difficult than you really think.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm making sense, in terms of the overall
Makes sense to
question.
me.
Yeah, I mean, what in hindsight is 2020 vision, right? It's
Yeah.
2020.
So
Yeah.
I also think that a lot of people that love their astral bliss have
Yeah.
no clue what they are getting themselves into. First of all, they act like junkies most of the time.
It's an addiction.
Yeah. And I also would, some yes, but I would say the majority, they have no idea where that energy, that bliss is really coming from. And again, if I were somebody that is trying to manipulate a human being from the astral realm, I would not come across as a creepy guy or girl. I would, of course, I would um, present myself with
It'd
love
be
and
like the
light and la 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 la.
wonderful guru and
Hmm.
you know, twin flame and these wonderful light beings and yeah.
Oh. So,
Yeah.
what would you tell people how how to avoid a lot of that? To wrap this up, what pitfalls would you say in hindsight were there red flags along the way where you would say today, yeah, okay, there were red flags and I ignored them happily. So what would you say, what to look out for?
I mean, I wouldn't have known unless I went through it. And I was looking at a lot of the bells and whistles, I think, of, well, not only with the love bite, like it was meant to be and it was a soulmate thing and it was so phenomenal and it has to have some spiritual significance and it makes me important too, right? And it was that. But, you know, I would say in order to see the red flags, you have to see what your own blind spots are,
Hmm?
especially you always have to look at what were your relationships like growing up and to be honest about what they were like and what they're like now, and is that normal. A lot of times you don't know what's normal unless somebody brings it to your attention or you have it basically hit over the head with something really painful, so that someone says, hey, it's not normal to be abused like that, right?
Hmm.
Like I've had people, even when I was before I was even 20, where I would have a job doing something and then I would have somebody who's waiting for me to pick me up. And then if I was late, I would just start becoming all afraid that they're just going to leave me, or be afraid like that something horrible would happen. And they were like, well, what's wrong with you? Were you abused? Like, I didn't even know I was acting like an abused person because of the fears were more than they should be. Like, you're in trauma, huh? You shouldn't be worried about if somebody's just going to abandon you because you're like 20 minutes late for work, you know?
Mhm.
that's not normal. That's what abused person would do, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So I didn't know until somebody said, hey, that's not normal. But when you're abused covertly, let's say by a covert narcissist or somebody who's really good at hiding, they could present on the outside to even your best friends and family as being this wonderful person, but you're being gaslit and abused in all these other ways. And they make you look like the bad one when you're reacting like emotionally to this horrible abuse. And then they think it's all your fault because you're complaining. And that's what's so hard about a covertly abusive situation, that
Yeah.
you don't know unless you're really in the situation. But if you were born and raised to normalize it because this is how one of your parents was, you won't know when you're in a relationship later that
Yeah.
you're being abused, because you're just going to like go right into another one. You can't stop it. Like, you really can't stop it unless you heal the original traumas. And that's what I learned. You have to like address the original traumas and the patterns. And sometimes with let's say if you're with somebody who's abusive or even covert narcissist or an addict, it's hard to get well on your own in some ways while you're still with that person, because just the existence of the relationship binds you and steals your energy and awareness and your power from fully being able to take your power back to fully heal. That's one of the things that I learned, that in order to have the power, you really need to disengage from those who are, gaslighting you or abusing you in whatever way. That you need to pull your energy back and you pull your awareness back and build your power base and your support base with people who truly understand, instead of people who will take the side of the abuser because they're just as messed up too. Because, when you think about it, like all these people who are following orders right now in society for things that's clearly a narrative that's being manipulated for the power and control and political agenda, which is kind of obvious. I don't even need to state what it is, right? That there's these people, I mean, this is the part that astounds me. There's people who are intelligent, right? Or even emotionally okay, but they're following orders like a bunch of mind-controlled slaves who don't know and can't see the forest for the trees. And they can't see the dark forces that are working behind people making these policies that are causing harm and suffering to people, to cause poverty and, all this other stuff. They don't know that they're following orders from a bunch of liars. And that to me is like, wow. You know what I mean?
Mm.
It's like the mind control is so effective.
Yeah.
It's because what they don't know is so huge. And it kind of goes back to what we said. When people don't know the reality of what's going on behind the scenes, if they even are presented with it, they may ignore it. Or if you told them, they literally won't hear you and they won't see you. It's like something just takes
Yeah.
over their consciousness and they literally can't see and they can't process the information. They'll just go back to the matrix, And that's frustrating when you can see, but you can't necessarily tell them, right?
Yeah. And what I also found interesting is sometimes they respond with what I call word salad. Yeah, let's say you
Oh,
address
no.
something very directly. Let's say you say, "Did you go for dinner with this other woman?" And then they start out saying, "Yeah, human beings have to eat dinner. Women have dinner, men have dinner. You know how the human body is structured. You need a certain amount of calories, you need your minerals, you need your vitamins," and they go on and on and on, but never, um, and then if you're lucky, you might get and why would you even think that I would do such a thing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
word salads, that is
Yeah.
also
Well, and it goes
something.
behind the whole silver tongue thing, right? Where
Yeah.
it goes back to the Bible or whatever, but how the dark side, they know how to manipulate through words. They're really good at the gaslighting and the NLP and the, non sequitur kinds of comments to try to deflect and confuse and then make you feel guilty for even questioning their integrity when they're lying all along. And they know they just lie because they lie, and that's what they do. Yeah. to confront them is difficult. Like sometimes you could catch them, but usually they'll just gaslight you, and um, I save my energy, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's not worth it.
Wow. Yeah.
So
So
Eve,
how is it in Germany
that
though?
was really, really interesting.
It's probably considered negative, but I'd say that I would rather know now,
Hmm.
knowing what I know, than have to go through life not knowing and running into what people may wake up to, which might be a real difficult thing for many people, you know, with like their belief systems and their religion or their politics, or even how they understand medicine may be completely untrue
Hmm.
according to what really is. So that's why a lot of people are headed for a wake-up call that they may not know how to process, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think even uncomfortable topics have to be addressed.
Yeah,
And if you don't like it, you can switch it off.
yeah, we can switch channels, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. So I thank you very much for coming. I had a great time. And I hope you will come back. We have to talk a little bit more.
Yeah, well, that's good. um I'll do that. And
Yeah.
the only thing I'll say is I'm going to be doing a group in January, like a Zoom group for people who've had any number of experiences in working with a colleague out of England who does something called the energy dynamic model.
Okay.
And it's something kind of new, but I've been applying it in my life for about 2 years. And it actually took a while to really get it and to make it work for me in a good way. And so we're going to be doing that together in a way where we can help people get through difficult blocks in their life. And I like the model because it really helps you build your energy and your awareness so you can make constructive change and constructive growth for being who you are in life without sabotage, and learning how to make that happen in a concrete way. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. And that is like a webinar.
Yeah, we're going to do like a group, like a once a week for 2 hours, and for a group that's bigger than 8 people on Zoom, where we can discuss, you know, our energy dynamic, learning how we process energy, and then
Mhm.
learning how we can apply the methodology of the power needs so that we can start moving along in life so that things start working for us in a positive way. And I really like how Jennifer Foster is the one who created this, but it was pretty brilliant the way she discovered it. And when I look at it, I see, well, this is somewhat Taoist in its energy understanding.
Mm.
But I think in Western culture, we tend to look at things from more of a psychological, mental viewpoint, which it has its value, but in terms of how to apply it in the real world in a concrete way, in an energetic way, there's another more powerful way to do it that it's being overlooked, I think, in our Western culture. So
Mm.
this is something we're going to be able to address and work with.
And
So,
is there a link on your website?
on my website, I did one article that was just kind of an introduction, like on disguised grief and how we can work with it. But I'm going to put up a post probably in the next week or so and
Okay.
give specific instructions on the group. So I'm just kind of giving a heads up before we start. It's not till like the middle of January or the third week. So
Mm.
we'll have some time.
Yeah. Okay. So, and if I spot that link, then I will put it in the description box, or otherwise people have to check that out on your website.
Yeah, I'll send it to you because I don't know if my newsletter is going out. They might be. I don't know if people are receiving it. So
Mm.
just have to keep posting. You know. Well, thank you for having me. It was good to just to be able to talk freely and
Yeah.
let it loose. You know.
So, okay, guys, that was it. Night flight for today with the wonderful Eve Logan. And we see you all next time. Stay safe from tyranny and stay sound out there. Have a great day. Enjoy your life. Bye bye.